The galaxy was full of stories. Some were told to inspire, some were told to frighten, and some were told to keep enemies apart forever. Among these stories, none were repeated more often than the tales of humanity's cruelty. On her homeworld, Soraya had heard them all. Elders whispered by the fireside of planets burned, treaties broken, and entire races crushed beneath the boots of humans. From her earliest memory, she had been taught one truth: humans cannot be trusted. They were liars, destroyers, monsters who wore friendly smiles only to stab others in the dark. Soraya had sworn an oath to herself. She would never bow to a human, never accept their help, never allow their words to soften her heart. To her, they were poison. Their kind had stolen too much from her people already, and she promised she would fight them until her last breath. Even in silence, even in the quiet of her thoughts, hatred was her shield. But fate was not a kind storyteller. Fate enjoyed cruel games, and fate had decided that Soraya's hatred would soon be tested in ways she never imagined. The war had reached its boiling point. Skirmishes along the border worlds had grown into full battles, and Soraya found herself captured during a failed defense of her station. She expected death, or worse, enslavement at the hands of the very monsters she despised. Instead, her captors handed her over. Not to a squad of guards, not to a faceless prison, but to a single human soldier. His name was Elias, and he was ordered to protect her. The first time she saw him standing tall in his armored suit, her stomach twisted in disgust. His eyes carried a strange calm, as if he had not come to gloat or to harm her, but she refused to believe it. Every step he took closer made her heart pound, not with fear, but with the kind of fury that burned hotter than fire. "Keep your distance, human," she spat, her voice sharp enough to cut. Elias only nodded, saying nothing. He did not raise his weapon, did not mock her. He simply extended a ration pack and said quietly, "You'll need your strength." Soraya slapped the pack from his hand. The container hit the ground, scattering small portions of food across the dirt. She turned her face away, determined not to let his false kindness trick her. She knew what humans were. This was another game, another way to make her weak. But as night fell over the ruined outpost where they were stranded, cold winds swept through the broken walls. Her body trembled, her wounds aching. Elias sat across from her, silently building a fire from scraps of wood and broken metal. He placed it between them, not too close to her, not too far, just enough for both of them to feel its warmth. He ate his own portion of food quietly, not once offering it again, but also not forcing her to starve. Soraya lay awake that night, staring at the flicker of the flames, her mind torn. Why had he not tried to chain her? Why had he not mocked her refusal? Why did his eyes carry no hate when hers were filled with it? She reminded herself of her oath. She hated him. She hated all humans. That was who she was. Yet deep inside, a small, dangerous thought whispered against her will. What if the stories were wrong? The next day brought danger. Enemy patrols drew close, and Elias woke her with urgency. He pressed a finger to his lips, guiding her silently into the shadows of the broken building. She expected him to use her as bait, to let her fall into enemy hands while he escaped. But instead he stood in front of her, his weapon raised, his body blocking her completely from sight. She didn't understand. Her people had always told her humans were cowards when death was near. Yet this one risked his life to shield her. When the danger passed, Soraya glared at him. "Why?" she demanded. Her voice shook, not with fear, but with anger at her own confusion. Elias only answered with simple words, "Because you're not my enemy right now." Those words cut deeper than any blade. She wanted to laugh at him, to scream that he was lying, but she had seen his actions with her own eyes. He had no reason to risk himself for her, and yet he did. As the days passed, Soraya's hatred remained, but cracks began to form. She still cursed him, still kept her distance, still swore she would never trust him. But when he returned from patrols carrying herbs for her wounds, when he handed her water before drinking his own, when he stayed awake through the night to keep watch while she slept, She felt her walls beginning to tremble, and she hated herself for it. Soraya had sworn she would never let a human touch her heart, but deep within, a storm of questions began to grow. Who was this Elias? Why did he not fit the stories? Why did his presence unsettle her more than any weapon ever could? She closed her eyes, clutching her oath like a lifeline. I hate him. I hate all humans. Yet, as the firelight flickered across his face, steady and calm in the shadows, a terrifying thought took root in her chest. What if my hatred has been a lie all along? The days inside the ruined outpost stretched long and heavy. Silence hung between Soraya and Elias like a blade, sharp and ready to cut at any moment. She kept her distance, her back pressed to the cracked walls, her eyes never leaving the human who had been forced into her company. She watched every move, waiting for the lie to show itself. Humans always revealed their true faces sooner or later, and she was determined to be ready when it happened. Yet Elias behaved in a way she could not understand. He moved with patience, his steps steady, his voice calm. He did not boast about his strength or try to control her. Instead, he acted as if she were not a prisoner but a companion. Every day he rebuilt small parts of the outpost, clearing rubble, patching holes, setting up crude defenses. At night he shared his fire, not once trying to push her closer, always letting her decide how near she wanted to sit. Soraya told herself it was a trick. That was the only explanation. But deep down, confusion gnawed at her heart. The first test of their uneasy bond came one cold morning when her strength finally gave out. Her wounds from the battle had festered, and fever burned through her body. She collapsed near the fire, her vision swimming. For a moment she expected Elias to turn away to let her die. It would be easier for him, one less burden to carry, but instead she felt his strong arms lift her, setting her carefully on a makeshift bed of cloth and scrap. Through blurred eyes she saw him working quickly, mixing herbs he had gathered in the forest, binding her wounds with careful hands. He spoke no words of comfort, but his actions shouted louder than any speech. He stayed awake the entire night, cooling her forehead, feeding her water when she could not lift her head. When morning came, and she finally opened her eyes, he was still there, exhausted but watching over her like a guardian. It made no sense. No human would do this. Not for her. Not for someone who spat in his face and cursed his name. And yet, Elias did. As she recovered, Soraya began to see things she had missed before. The way Elias always scanned the horizon before resting. The way he quietly rationed his food so she could eat a little more. The way his eyes softened when he saw her pain. These were not the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of someone who carried a heavy weight, someone who had chosen duty over comfort, sacrifice over safety. One evening, as the fire cracked between them, Soraya finally broke the silence. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was sharp, but it trembled at the edges. "Why do you do this? Why help me when you know I would not do the same for you?" Elias looked at her, his expression calm, unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, only letting the firelight dance across his features. Then he answered in simple words, "Because it's the right thing to do." Those words unsettled her more than any weapon. The right thing? What did humans know of right or wrong? Her people had always painted them as beasts, as deceivers who twisted truth to their advantage, and yet this man spoke as if his soul was guided by a code stronger than fear or hate. The next test came with a storm. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, winds tearing through the broken outpost. Rain hammered down, flooding the floor, threatening to drown their fragile fire. Soraya shivered, her thin clothes no match for the cold. Without a word, Elias removed his own cloak and wrapped it around her shoulders. She tried to protest, to throw it back at him, but the warmth spread too quickly, too deeply. Her body betrayed her heart as she held the cloak tight, her teeth no longer chattering. Elias sat opposite her, soaked, shivering, but silent. He did not demand thanks. He did not even meet her eyes. He simply gave what he had and endured the rest himself. That night, Soraya lay awake, staring at the dripping ceiling. Her oath echoed in her mind. I will never trust a human. But now that oath trembled. Elias's actions carved cracks into the wall of hate she had built her entire life. She told herself it was weakness, a passing trick of survival. Yet deep down, something else stirred. A fragile thought, dangerous and new. Perhaps I was wrong. She closed her eyes, clutching the cloak tighter. Sleep came slowly, filled with shadows and firelight. And though her lips would never admit it, for the first time in her life, she felt safer with a human watching over her than she ever thought possible. The fragile alliance had begun, not through words, but through silent acts of courage and kindness. And though Soraya swore she would never let it grow, the seed had already been planted. What neither of them knew was that this fragile trust would soon be tested in the most brutal way imaginable. The enemy had discovered their trail, and the hunters were closing in. The nights grew colder, and the silence between Soraya and Elias grew heavier. The fragile peace they had found was still alive, but Soraya's heart battled itself each day. She wanted to hate him. She tried to keep her walls high, but every act of kindness chipped away at them. And still, she reminded herself, humans always betray in the end. That belief was tested when the enemy came hunting. It started with faint echoes in the distance, boots crunching through the broken earth, whispers of soldiers moving in formation, the glint of weapons under the pale light of the twin moons. Soraya froze when she heard them. Her people had told her, time and again, that humans valued their own survival above all else. She expected Elias to abandon her, to slip away into the shadows and leave her behind as bait. But Elias did not run. He crouched low beside her, his hand signaling her to stay silent. His eyes, steady and calm, met hers. Then he positioned himself in front of her, his weapon raised. His body became her shield. Soraya's heart pounded. Confusion and fear swirled inside her. Why was he standing there, ready to face death for her? She wanted to scream at him, to demand why, but her voice caught in her throat. The enemy drew closer. Their voices carried through the ruins, cold, mocking, certain of victory. Soraya braced herself for betrayal. Any second now, Elias would reveal his true self. He would hand her over. That was what humans did. That was the story she had always believed. But then the gunfire started. Elias opened fire without hesitation, his shots sharp and controlled, forcing the soldiers back into cover. Explosions rocked the outpost walls, sending dust and smoke into the air. Soraya crouched low, trembling, not from fear of the enemy, but from the storm raging inside her heart. The human she hated was fighting not for himself, but for her. A blast tore through part of the wall, sending rubble crashing down. Elias shoved her out of the way, the debris slamming into his shoulder. He grunted in pain, but refused to fall. With one arm barely able to move, he kept firing, his jaw set, his eyes locked on the enemy. Soraya stared at him in disbelief. You're going to die, she shouted, her voice breaking. Not if I can help it, Elias growled, forcing himself back to his feet. The battle raged on. Shadows darted between ruins, weapons flashing. Soraya could do little but watch as Elias bled, sweat pouring down his face, yet refusing to back down. Every instinct she had screamed at her to run, but her legs would not move. For the first time in her life, her hate felt small compared to the weight of his actions. At last, the enemy retreated, leaving only silence and smoke. Elias collapsed to one knee, his chest rising and falling heavily. Soraya rushed forward before she realized what she was doing. She pressed her hands against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "You fool," she whispered. "Why didn't you run? Why didn't you save yourself?" Elias looked at her through half-closed eyes, his voice weak but steady. "Because leaving you was never an option." Her breath caught. The words hit her harder than any weapon. She had waited for betrayal, expected it, even wanted it, so her hatred would remain justified. But what she found instead was sacrifice. A human had chosen her life over his own. That night, As Elias lay wounded and Soraya kept watch by his side, she could not sleep. The story she had believed all her life crumbled inside her mind. For the first time she saw not a monster but a man, flawed, mortal but stronger in spirit than she could understand. And yet, even as doubt filled her heart, fear whispered a warning. This cannot last. Trusting him will only bring pain. But another voice, softer and stronger, whispered back, what if he is different? What if the stories were wrong? The fragile alliance was no longer fragile. It had been forged in fire and blood. And though Soraya refused to admit it aloud, she knew the truth. She no longer wanted Elias to be her enemy. What neither of them realized was that this small bond had already been noticed. The enemy had not truly retreated. They had simply laid a trap, and soon Soraya and Elias would be forced to make choices that would decide whether their alliance lived or died in betrayal. The silence after the ambush did not last long. Soraya could feel it in the air. The enemy was not finished. The patrol Elias fought off was only the first wave. More were coming. The ruined outpost, their fragile shelter, was no longer safe. Elias leaned against the wall, his arm bleeding from a deep wound. His face was pale, but his eyes still burned with the same quiet strength. Soraya wanted to shout at him, to demand why he kept risking himself for her. But when she opened her mouth, no words came. All she could do was look at the man she once swore to hate and realize he had already given more than she ever thought possible. By nightfall, the sound of engines filled the air. Enemy dropships were landing. Searchlights swept across the ruins, cutting through the dark. Soraya's heart pounded. They've found us, she whispered. Her voice trembled. Elias checked his weapon, his movements slower than before. He knew what was coming, and so did she. Dozens of soldiers against 2 broken survivors. It was no fight. It was a death sentence. We can't win this, Soraya said, panic rising in her chest. They'll kill us both. Elias looked at her, his expression calm, steady. Not both, he said quietly. Her eyes widened. She understood what he meant, and fear stabbed her deeper than any blade. No, don't you dare. There's an escape pod hidden in the old hangar, Elias explained. It's small, 1 passenger only. You'll take it. You'll live. Soraya shook her head violently. I will not leave you. I refuse to owe my life to a human. He gave her a faint smile, one that carried both pain and warmth. It's not about what you owe. It's about what's right. Before she could argue, explosions thundered outside. The enemy was advancing, their voices echoing through the broken walls. Elias grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the hangar. She fought against him, but his grip was firm, unyielding. Inside the shattered hangar, half buried in rubble, the small pod waited, old, rusted, but still functional. Elias quickly cleared the controls, powering it up. Soraya's throat tightened. She realized there was no choice left. The enemy would be upon them in minutes. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. You can't do this. If I hated you before, I hate you even more now, for trying to throw your life away. Elias turned to her, his face lit by the faint glow of the pod's controls. If I die saving you, then maybe you'll finally see that not all humans are what you believed. Maybe that will matter someday. Her eyes filled with tears, hot and bitter. For years she had sworn she would never cry for a human. But in that moment, she could not stop. The sound of boots drew closer. Shouts filled the air. The enemy was here. Elias lifted her into the pod despite her struggles. His strength, even wounded, was unshakable. She grabbed his armor, trying to pull him in with her. Come with me, she screamed. We can both fit, please. He shook his head. No, if we both try, neither will make it. This is your chance, Soraya. Take it. The pod door began to close. Panic surged through her chest. Elias! Don't! Leave me, please. He placed a hand on the glass as it sealed shut, his blood smearing against the surface. His voice was calm, steady, the same voice that had carried her through fear and fire. Live, that's all I ask. The engines roared. The pod launched into the night sky, shaking violently as it escaped the ruins. Through the small window, Soraya saw the last image she would ever carry of him. Elias standing tall in the burning hangar, weapon in hand, facing an army alone. Tears blurred her vision as the stars swallowed her escape. Her chest ached, torn, between rage and grief. She had sworn to hate humanity forever, but now, because of one man, her hatred was gone, replaced by something far heavier: loss. In the silence of the pod, she whispered his name, again and again, as if the sound could keep him alive. But deep inside, she knew the truth. Elias had chosen sacrifice. He had given his life not for glory, not for power, but simply to prove that one human could be more than the stories. And in doing so, he had changed her forever. The escape pod drifted through the silent void, stars stretching endlessly in every direction. Soraya sat inside, her fists clenched, her chest burning with emotions she had never known before. She had sworn her whole life to hate humans. She had sworn to see them only as monsters. But now one man's sacrifice haunted her thoughts. Elias's face, calm even in death, would not leave her mind. Hours passed in silence. She whispered his name again and again as if speaking it could bring him back. Her hatred was gone, replaced by something sharper, heavier. She felt grief. And under that grief, a spark of something far more dangerous: hope. When the pod finally landed on her homeworld, she stumbled out, weak and trembling. Her people rushed to her, shouting questions, praising her survival. They wanted to hear about the humans, about their cruelty, about their betrayal. They expected her to confirm every story they had ever told. But Soraya stood before them silent. Her heart pounded as she looked into their eager faces. She thought of Elias, of his blood on the glass, of his words. Maybe you'll finally see that not all humans are what you believed. When she spoke, her voice was steady, though her eyes burned with tears. You are wrong, she told them. The crowd froze, confusion rippling through them. You are all wrong. Not every human is a monster. Not every story we were told is true. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Elders frowned. Warriors muttered in anger. But Soraya did not stop. She told them about Elias, the soldier who gave her food when she spat at him, who healed her wounds when she cursed his name, who shielded her from blaster fire with his own body, who sacrificed himself so she could live. She spoke of his courage, his kindness, his choice to fight and die for someone who had sworn to hate him. He was human, she said, her voice breaking, and he saved me. Silence followed her words. No one knew how to answer. For generations they had lived by hate, and now she had planted a seed of doubt in their hearts. Doubt was dangerous. It cracked the walls of certainty, and once cracks appeared, nothing could keep the truth from breaking through. In the days that followed, whispers spread across her world. Some called her a liar, a traitor poisoned by the enemy. Others listened quietly, wondering if perhaps the stories they had been told were incomplete. Soraya felt their eyes on her wherever she went, but she did not waver. She carried Elias's memory like a flame inside her chest, and that flame gave her strength. At night, when she was alone, she would sit beneath the stars and whisper to the sky. I hated you once. I swore I always would. But now, I will never forget you. You changed me, Elias. You changed everything. Her story spread beyond her world. Traders carried her words to other systems, and soon entire fleets began to question what they knew of humans. Were they truly monsters? Or was there more to them than the galaxy had believed? And though Soraya could never know it, her story reached ears across the stars, ears that belonged to humans themselves. Among them, Elias's name was remembered. A soldier who gave his life not for victory, but for a single alien who once swore to hate him. His act became a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of war, compassion could light a spark strong enough to change the galaxy. Years later, Soraya still dreamed of him. She remembered the firelight on his face, the weight of his cloak on her shoulders, the sound of his voice as he told her to live. She had lost him forever, but she had gained something greater, truth. And so when her people finally asked her why she kept telling the same story again and again, she gave them her answer. Because one man proved me wrong, she said. And, if he could, then perhaps there is hope for all of us. The galaxy would never be the same again.